The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It was less a downpour and more a relentless, weeping sky, blurring the edges of the world outside the small, remote mountain town of Saint Armand. The perpetual gray of the clouds seemed to press down on the valley, trapping the damp, cold air and the pervasive sense of isolation. Elena Morgan stood under the cracked concrete awning of St. Armand's Regional Hospital, gripping her overnight duffel bag so tightly her knuckles ached, the cheap fabric of the handle digging into her palm. The wind, sharp and cold even in mid-September, sliced through the thin, starched material of her new scrubs, raising goosebumps on her arms and making her shiver despite herself. The building loomed before her like a tombstone, a monolithic block of gray, angular concrete, its brutalist architecture softened only by the pervasive grime and decay. It was clearly forgotten by time and, more significantly, by the state budget. Its numerous windows, dark and vacant, stared out like dead eyes, reflecting nothing but the leaden sky. She could almost hear the bones of the place creaking, a low, structural groan that seemed to emanate from deep within its foundations, even from outside. The air itself felt heavy, saturated not just with rain, but with something else, stagnation, perhaps, or a lingering despair that had settled into the very mortar. "Perfect," she muttered, the word a dry, bitter whisper against the wind that whipped strands of her dark hair across her face. She stared up at the hospital sign, a relic of a bygone era, its once bright letters now faded and peeling. One bulb above the S in ST buzzed with a frantic, dying energy, casting a twitchy, sickly halo of yellow light on the wet pavement below. It was a fitting, if ominous, welcome. This job was supposed to be a fresh start, a way to outrun the ghosts of her own past, the quiet failures, the unspoken guilt, the sense of having let someone down that clung to her like the mountain mist. But looking at St. Armand's, it felt less like an escape and more like a deeper plunge into the shadows, a descent into a place where the past lingered, thick and suffocating. A rusted security door, painted a faded, institutional green that had long since lost its cheer, clanked open with a groan that echoed the building's own structural complaints. A man in a rain-soaked parka leaned out, his silhouette bulky against the dim interior light. A cigarette dangled precariously from his lips, its cherry glowing faintly in the gloom, a tiny, defiant ember against the pervasive damp. His eyes, shadowed by the hood, squinted at her, assessing. "You Elena?" His voice was gruff, raspy from years of smoke. "Yeah," she replied, her voice sounding thin and reedy against the constant drumming of the rain on the awning. He gestured inside with a jerk of his head, not unkindly. "Come on in. You'll catch pneumonia out here. Or worse, you'll rust." He offered no smile, just a grim, tired set to his jaw that suggested a long acquaintance with the world's harsher realities. The interior was somehow colder than outside, a damp, bone-deep chill that seeped into her clothes and settled in her joints. The entrance hall was a testament to decades of neglect. Yellowed, cracked linoleum tiles stretched underfoot, their once geometric pattern worn smooth in places by countless footsteps. The once white ceiling was now a patchwork of water stains, some spreading like malignant growths, others peeling away in curling strips. The air hung thick with a smell like mold mixed with stale bleach, a sickly sweet overlay of decay and disinfectant that made her stomach clench. Elena wiped her shoes meticulously on the threadbare mat just inside the door, a futile gesture against the pervasive grime, trying to ignore the frantic, high-pitched buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead, a sound that vibrated directly into her teeth, a constant, irritating hum. "I'm Daryl. Night security," the man said, pulling his hood down with a weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the building itself. His face was a road map of grizzled lines, tired eyes set deep in a network of wrinkles, a 5 o'clock shadow that looked more like permanent stubble than a temporary growth. He looked like he'd seen too many nights, too many bad ends, too many things he couldn't explain. "Welcome to hell, kid." She offered a tired, almost automatic smile, a reflex she'd perfected over years of dealing with difficult patients and weary colleagues. "Thanks. Excited to be here." The sarcasm was lost on him, or perhaps he was just too weary to acknowledge it. He didn't laugh. He just exhaled a plume of stale cigarette smoke, the faint, acrid smell of nicotine mingling with the hospital's own unique bouquet of decay and fear. They walked in silence past the empty reception desk, its surface thick with a fine layer of dust, and into the darkened hallways. The main corridor stretched before them, a tunnel of dim light and deeper shadows. Most of the hospital had been shut down years ago, after the state cut funding and the nearest city, miles away, built a gleaming new medical center. Now St. Armand's operated with a skeleton crew, a forgotten outpost mostly serving a handful of elderly or palliative care patients too far from better facilities, or those with nowhere else to go. It was a place for the forgotten, by the forgotten, a hospice for a dying era. "Elena, right? You're covering night shifts." Daryl's voice was a low rumble, devoid of inflection, a monotone that matched the oppressive quiet of the building. "3 nights a week," she confirmed, pulling her duffel bag higher on her shoulder, the weight of it a small, comforting anchor in this strange, desolate place. It was the only thing that felt familiar. Daryl grunted, a non-committal sound that seemed to encompass a lifetime of grim experience and unspoken warnings. "Then you'll be working solo after 10 p.m. I'm mostly just here to make sure no one breaks in or out. We got 6 patients in the East Wing. They're mostly sleepers, thank God. Quiet types. Don't go near the West Wing. It's sealed off." His voice dropped slightly on the last sentence, a subtle shift in tone that caught her attention. She glanced at him, a flicker of professional curiosity overriding her initial unease. "Why is it sealed?" The question felt natural, instinctual. Nurses were trained to investigate, to understand, to peel back the layers of a problem. He gave her a slow, assessing look, his tired eyes holding a depth that suggested a long acquaintance with the hospital's particular brand of strangeness. It was like he was deciding if she was worth the effort of a real answer, or if she was just another temporary face passing through, destined to break. Officially, fire damage. Happened back in the 80s. Structural integrity compromised. Hazardous materials, probably asbestos, lead paint, all that fun stuff. Unofficially? He paused, taking a slow, deliberate drag from his cigarette, the tip glowing red in the dimness, illuminating the hard lines around his mouth. Unofficially, place gives people the creeps. No cameras, no lights. You'll hear things. Just ignore them. Best to keep your head down, Nurse Morgan. Don't go looking for trouble where there ain't none. Like what? She pressed, a chill that had nothing to do with the cold seeping into her, a cold that felt more like anticipation. Voices. Whispers in the dark. Doors closing when there's no draft, no one around. One guy, a temporary orderly they hired last year, swore he saw a light down there once, like a lantern moving through the absolute black. Said it was too low for a person, too steady. He quit the next morning, didn't even collect his last paycheck. Daryl's voice was flat, devoid of emotion, as if relaying a weather report, but his eyes lingered on her a beat too long, a silent, heavy warning in their depths. But if anyone tries to open that door, I gotta write it up. It's a major liability. State regulations. So don't. Just don't. Got it, she said, though a part of her, the part that had sought out this remote, isolated job, felt an undeniable pull toward the forbidden wing. It was the same part that always needed to know, to understand, to peel back the layers of a mystery, no matter how dark or unsettling. It was a compulsion, a flaw in her character, perhaps, that had led her to St. Armand's in the first place. They stopped at the nurse's station, a relic of the 1950s, its laminated wood surface scarred with countless coffee rings and pin marks, a history of countless weary shifts. The ancient computer sat under a cracked plastic cover, its screen dark, a monument to obsolescence. Folders, thick with age and dust, were stacked precariously in one corner, a chipped ceramic coffee mug, stained brown, in another. A laminated chart, faded but legible, hung above the desk with 6 patient names and room numbers, their conditions briefly noted in smudged ink. Mrs. Klein, Mr. Harris, Mr. Lubansky, all just names on a list. "No one needs meds until morning," Darrell said, stubbing out his cigarette in an overflowing ashtray, its contents a grim collection of butts. "Just make your rounds once an hour, check vitals, write him down. If something's wrong, call the on-call doc. That's Dr. Felix. She's a good doc, but she won't answer unless someone's actively dying, so don't bother unless it's real. And I mean real. Like flatlining and turning blue real." Elena nodded, taking in the sparse instructions. It was simple enough. A quiet night, a few rounds, a lot of time to herself. Just what she needed. A place to hide, to heal, to forget. He looked at her duffel bag again, a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth that might have been a nascent smile, or just indigestion. "Break room's down that hall. Coffee machine sometimes works, sometimes shocks people. Welcome to St. Armand's, Nurse Morgan. Hope you like the quiet." And just like that, he walked off, his heavy boots echoing down the corridor, the sound fading into the pervasive quiet of the hospital, leaving Elena utterly alone in the dim, buzzing light of the nurse's station. The silence that followed was not empty, but filled with the subtle creaks and groans of the old building, sounds that now seemed to take on a new, sinister meaning. Elena dropped her duffel bag in the break room, a sad little space that felt less like a sanctuary and more like a forgotten closet. A single fluorescent light, half dead, flickered with a frantic, stuttering rhythm, casting jumpy shadows across the peeling linoleum floor. Its erratic buzzing was a constant irritant, a high-pitched whine that seemed to mirror the tension coiling in her stomach. 2 cracked vinyl chairs, their stuffing long since migrated, faced each other across a scarred formica table, looking like weary sentinels. In the corner, a vending machine, a relic from the 90s, its glass display smudged, still advertised Pepsi and stale potato chips with faded, sun-bleached images. A faded poster on the wall, curling at the edges, declared "Hygiene is healing" in cheerful, utterly out-of-place Comic Sans. It was a stark contrast to the grim reality of the hospital, a pathetic attempt at cheer in a place that seemed to actively resist it. She sat for a moment, the hum of the relentless rain outside blending with the frantic buzz of the dying electricity overhead. It was a strange quiet. Not peaceful, not the comforting silence of a sleeping house, but expectant, like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She felt a prickle of unease, a sense of being watched, a faint chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. But she dismissed it as first-night jitters. This was a hospital, after all. Old buildings creaked. Pipes groaned. It was just the wind, the settling of an ancient structure. Her mind, ever practical, sought logical explanations. At 11 p.m., she began her first round. The east wing was small, a single, dimly lit corridor that curved gently. The air here was thick with the faint, cloying scent of antiseptic and old age, a sickly sweet overlay that clung to her nostrils. The walls were a faded institutional beige, scarred with scuff marks and patched repairs. Room 2, a one-housed Mrs. Klein, a dementia patient who was mostly nonverbal, lost somewhere in the labyrinth of her own mind. Her frail body was barely a mound under the thin blanket. Elena checked her vitals, stable, if slow, the pulse weak but steady, adjusted the thin blanket that had slipped from her frail shoulders, and whispered a soft, "You're okay, Mrs. Klein." Even though the woman didn't react, her eyes staring blankly at the water-stained ceiling, seeing something only she could perceive. Room 203 held Mr. Harris, a lung cancer patient tethered to a morphine drip. He was asleep, or perhaps sedated into a deeper slumber, his labored breath rasping out in uneven waves, a sound that filled the small room, punctuated by a faint, wet cough. The steady, rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside his bed, a green line dancing across its screen, was a strangely comforting sound, a reminder of life, however fragile, however fleeting. Rooms 204 through 208, quiet. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. Just the soft sounds of breathing, the occasional rustle of sheets, the distant hum of the building, the drip of the 4 bags. The mundane rhythm of a hospital night. She liked hospitals, in a way. The order, the systems, the quiet efficiency of care, even in a place as dilapidated as this. The way each hallway felt like a story with a beginning and an end, a journey from admission to discharge. There was a comfort in the routine, in the predictable cycle of life and death. And this one, for all its decay, still had some rhythm, some semblance of its original purpose, a faint pulse of life within its crumbling shell. Until she passed the west wing door. It was painted a dull, institutional gray, a shade that seemed to absorb all light, making the area around it feel darker, colder. A rusting sign, its paint flaking like old skin, hung crookedly above it. Ward 6. Authorized personnel only. Heavy, corroded chains, thick with rust, wrapped around the tarnished brass handle, fastened with a thick, ancient padlock, its metal pitted and green with age. A small warning sticker, once bright yellow, had faded into illegibility, its message lost to time and neglect, a silent scream unheard. She stopped, not to open it, not yet, but just to look, to acknowledge its presence, its forbidden nature. It was a dark, silent sentinel, guarding whatever secrets lay beyond, radiating an almost palpable sense of unease. That's when the intercom crackled. The sound was sharp, sudden, a jolt in the oppressive quiet, making her jump. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat, a frantic bird caught in a cage. The speakers embedded in the ceiling, dusty and discolored, had come to life, just for a moment. There was no music, no general announcement, no voice from the front desk. Just static. A brief, sharp hiss, like a snake's warning. And then a voice. Elena. It was barely audible, a whisper thin as smoke, drawn out and distorted, as if spoken through a long, dark tunnel, or through a thick, viscous medium. But it was unmistakable. Her name, spoken with a strange, elongated quality, a chilling familiarity. She froze. Every muscle in her body locked. The blood in her veins felt like ice. Her breath hitched, caught in her throat. Then the speaker clicked off with a soft, final pop, leaving the silence even heavier than before, a void that seemed to swallow all sound. She looked around frantically, her eyes darting into every shadow. The hall was empty. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of rainwater from a leak near the ceiling, echoing in the sudden void, a relentless, maddening rhythm. Her breath hitched in her throat, a desperate gasp for air. "Okay," she whispered, backing away slowly, her eyes still fixed on the silent intercom speaker. as if it might suddenly spark to life again. Nope, not tonight. Not a chance. Her voice was barely a thread of sound, a desperate attempt to rationalize the impossible. She returned to the nurse's station, her steps quick and uneven, a frantic urgency driving her. She immediately checked the old intercom panel. It was a monstrous piece of machinery, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust, its plastic casing yellowed and cracked. The power light was off. It didn't even have power. She ran her fingers across the rows of non-functional buttons, cold and unresponsive under her touch. No, this couldn't be. It was impossible. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe Daryl was screwing with her, testing her nerves, seeing how easily she'd break. It had to be a trick. The security office had monitors, she remembered. Maybe he'd patched something through, a speaker in the hall connected to his desk, a hidden microphone. She needed to find him. She needed an explanation, a logical, mundane reason for the impossible. But when she went to look, the office was empty. The air inside was stale, thick with the lingering smell of Daryl's cigarettes and something else. At 1:37 a.m., Elena woke up to the sound of footsteps. She hadn't meant to fall asleep, had fought against the creeping exhaustion, but the accumulated fatigue of the past few days, combined with the unnerving quiet of the break room, had pulled her under. Now, she was instantly awake, every nerve ending screaming, her body rigid with a primal fear. The footsteps. They were soft, deliberate, rubber soles on tile, a slow, dragging scruff, scruff. Not the hurried pace of a nurse on rounds, nor the shuffling gait of an elderly patient. This was a measured, unhurried tread, like someone waiting, pacing with an eerie, infinite patience. Back and forth, back and forth. The sound seemed to emanate from the hallway just outside, impossibly close, almost directly above her. She sat bolt upright in the cracked vinyl chair, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. The rain still tapped against the high, grimy windows of the break room, a steady, monotonous rhythm, a constant backdrop to the horror. But beneath it, those steps kept going. Scruff, scruff. They were distinct, undeniable. She grabbed her flashlight, its beam a weak, trembling circle in the gloom, her hand shaking so violently the light danced erratically. She eased the door open, wincing at the faint squeak of the hinges, the sound amplified in the profound quiet. The hallway was empty. The nurse's station light was still on, casting a pale, sickly wash over the yellowed tiled floor. The walls stretched quiet and still toward the patient rooms on the left and the west wing door on the right. The air was thick and cold, carrying the faint, metallic tang of ozone, or something even more unsettling, something ancient and stagnant. Her eyes, drawn by an irresistible, morbid curiosity, a compulsion she couldn't fight, locked on the west wing door. The dull gray paint, the rusting sign, the heavy chains, they were all there, just as she'd left them. A faint sense of relief washed over her, quickly replaced by a fresh wave of dread. But the padlock was gone. She blinked, once, twice, rubbing her eyes, trying to reconcile the impossible image with her memory. No, it couldn't be. She had seen it, felt its cold metal, just hours ago. She had wedged the chair. She stepped closer, her shoes making no sound on the floor. She hadn't noticed it before, but the linoleum was wet, slick with a thin film of moisture. Her footprints, disturbingly, trailed behind her in a thin path of red-brown water, as if she had walked through something dark and viscous. The color made her stomach churn, a sickening lurch of fear. It looked like diluted blood. The lock wasn't just off. It was on the floor, lying innocently beside the doorframe, open, its rusted shackle somehow cleaner, brighter, as if something had eaten away the corrosion from the inside, leaving the metal strangely pristine. It was as if it had simply dissolved. She backed away instinctively, a choked gasp escaping her lips. The air felt suddenly too thin, too heavy, pressing down on her. "Daryl," she called, her voice low but sharp, a desperate plea for a rational explanation, for a human presence. No answer. Only the drip, drip, drip of water from the ceiling leak, mocking her with its relentless rhythm. She turned and walked quickly, almost ran, toward the security office again, her mind racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Daryl had to be here. He had to be. Still empty. The stale air, the lingering cigarette smell, the silent console, all exactly as she'd left it. A cold dread began to solidify in her chest, turning into a leaden weight. She picked up the office phone, its receiver heavy and cold in her trembling hand, to dial out. No dial tone, not even static, just a dead, unresponsive line. The hospital was a tomb, cut off from the world, a self-contained nightmare. She checked the monitors again. One was now glowing with a sickly green light, displaying a low-light camera view of something. A hallway, but not one she recognized. It was too dark, too narrow, too archaic, unlike any part of the hospital she had seen. It showed a man standing in the shadows, facing the camera, still as a statue, his form indistinct in the gloom, a silhouette against an even deeper darkness. He seemed to be waiting, watching. The timestamp flickered in the corner of the screen, 3:33 a.m. She looked at the wall clock behind her, its hands moving with agonizing slowness, 1:39 a.m. The discrepancy hit her like a physical blow, a punch to the gut. Almost 2 hours into the future. How? How was this possible? Her mind struggled to grasp the impossibility of it. The monitor snapped off, plunging the corner of the office back into darkness. She stood there, frozen, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles ached, digging crescent moons into her palms. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying, broken only by the frantic pounding of her own heart. Then the intercom clicked on again. A single, sharp click. Static for a second, a familiar hiss that made her jump. And then, code gray. Patient unaccounted for. Code gray. Code gray. It repeated 3 times, the same flat, monotonous voice as before, devoid of human inflection, like a recording played on a loop, a broken record of dread. Then silence. A profound, suffocating silence that seemed to press in on her from all sides. Elena went room by room, her flashlight beam dancing nervously over the walls, chasing away the shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch with malevolent intent. The air grew colder with each step, the silence deeper. All 6 patients were still there, all 6 asleep or sedated, their breathing shallow, their monitors beeping with reassuring regularity. Nothing out of place, no signs of disturbance. The normalcy was almost more unsettling than the abnormalities, a thin veneer over a terrifying truth. Except, in room 206, a folded piece of paper sat on the bedside table. It was a crisp, white sheet, stark against the faded floral pattern of the blanket. She hadn't seen it before. It hadn't been there when she did her first round or any of her previous checks. It was too pristine, too deliberate. No one here could have written it. The patient inside, Mr. Lubansky, a man in his late 70s with a gaunt face and a network of tubes emerging from his body, had been in a coma for 2 weeks. He hadn't stirred since his admission, a silent, unmoving presence. She opened the note carefully, her fingers trembling, the paper feeling strangely cold. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost clinical, yet imbued with a chilling urgency. Do not answer the intercom. Do not open Ward 6. He will call your name. That is not your name anymore. Her stomach dropped, a cold, sickening lurch. The words were a direct, personal warning, an impossible message from an unseen source. It spoke of a malevolent intelligence, of a fate worse than death. The last line, "That is not your name anymore," sent a shiver of pure dread down her spine, hinting at a loss of identity, a transformation into something else. She spun, half expecting someone to be standing behind her, a figure in the doorway, a shadow in the corner, but the room was empty. Only the soft hiss of the oxygen line and the quiet beep of the heart monitor, mocking her with their mundane sounds. She tucked the note into her pocket, the paper feeling strangely warm against her skin, a physical reminder of the impossible, and stepped back into the hallway. Then she heard it again, the footsteps. But this time, they were right above her. A slow, dragging step, followed by a heavy thump. Scruff, thump. Scruff, thump. It was a different sound now, heavier, more deliberate, as if something immense was being dragged across the floor above. It sent a shiver of pure dread down her spine, a sound that resonated deep within her bones. It was the sound of something large, something patient, something that was not human. She glanced up. The ceiling tiles directly above her were shifting, slowly and deliberately, as if something vast and unseen was pressing against them from above, moving just out of sight. Dust, thick and gray, fell from the seams, drifting down in the beam of her flashlight, settling like a fine shroud. The sound was moving down the hall, tracking slowly toward the west wing, toward Ward 6. It was a relentless, methodical progression, a predator stalking its prey. She followed. Her fear was a cold, constant companion, a knot of ice in her stomach, but her curiosity, a dangerous, insatiable hunger, propelled her forward. She had to know. She had to understand. She was a nurse. She was trained to face the unknown, to help, even if this unknown defied all reason. The Ward 6 door stood slightly ajar now. The dull gray paint seemed darker, more ominous, almost absorbing the dim light from the east wing. The heavy chains she had so desperately resecured were pushed aside, lying in a tangled heap on the floor. Not broken, just unwound, like someone had calmly, meticulously unlocked them, as if they were never meant to hold anything back, merely to give the illusion of security. Elena took a shaky breath, the air thick with the smell of old dust, and something else, something metallic and acrid, like burnt copper and stale blood. She stepped forward and shone her flashlight into the gap. Beyond it was only blackness, a corridor of absolute darkness, damp and windowless, stretching into an unseen abyss. The air was colder here, thick with the scent of mildew and stagnant water, a profound chill that seeped into her bones. Her beam flicked across the walls, revealing peeling green paint, old, exposed wiring hanging like dead vines, and what looked like names scratched into the plaster, too faint to read from this distance, a silent testament to forgotten occupants. It was a place that had been abandoned, but not forgotten. A place that held its secrets close. Her beam flicked across something on the ground, lying just inside the threshold, a hospital ID badge. It gleamed faintly in the gloom, a small, plastic rectangle. She picked it up. The plastic was brittle, yellowed with age, its edges rough under her thumb. Lionel Kearns, MD, psychiatric consultant, issue date, May 2nd, 1986, a psychiatrist. From the 1980s. The fire. Daryl's story. It was all beginning to connect, in a terrifying, disjointed way. A doctor who should have been long gone. She turned it over. Written in faded, almost illegible pen on the back, scrawled with a desperate hand. I can't leave either. The hallway behind her creaked. A long, drawn-out groan that sounded like a sigh, or a door slowly closing. When she turned, she saw room 200 and SIXS door was open. It had been closed when she left it, she was certain. And Mr. Lubansky, who should have been comatose, who had been comatose for 2 weeks, a silent, unmoving presence, was sitting upright in bed, his frail body propped against the pillows, his eyes wide, glassy, and unblinking, staring directly at her, a silent, terrifying accusation. Elena didn't breathe. Her lungs felt seized, her throat constricted, as if an invisible hand had clamped around it. Mr. Lubansky stared at her, his eyes wide, glassy, and unblinking, fixed with an unnatural, unwavering intensity. He didn't move, didn't speak. His oxygen line hissed softly in the background, a sound that should have grounded her, should have reminded her this was real, that she was in a hospital, that there were medical explanations for everything. But it didn't feel real. Nothing felt real anymore. The mundane sounds of the hospital now seemed like a cruel mockery. "Mr. Lubansky," she whispered, her voice thin and reedy, barely audible even to herself, a desperate plea for a response, for a sign of life. No response, only the unblinking stare, the silent accusation in his eyes, a profound emptiness that chilled her to the bone. She stepped closer, careful not to startle him, though something deep inside warned her, don't get too close. Don't touch him. Don't break the spell. A primal instinct screamed at her to flee, to turn and run, but her nursing training, her innate curiosity, her desperate need for answers, held her rooted to the spot. She reached for the call button beside his bed, a familiar, comforting action, a symbol of control, then stopped. Her fingers froze inches from the cold plastic. The machines weren't beeping anymore. The steady, rhythmic pulse of the heart monitor, the reassuring green line dancing across the screen. All gone. The soft hum of the pump, the gentle whoosh of the ventilator, silenced. She turned to look at the monitor itself. Flatline. A single, unwavering green line stretched across the screen, a stark, undeniable declaration of death. No heartbeat, no vitals, no sound from the machine, just the flat, silent line. Yet he was still sitting up, eyes locked on hers, a silent, impossible sentinel, defying all medical logic. And then, in a voice as dry and cracking as dead leaves skittering across pavement, a voice that seemed to come from deep within the room, from the very air, not from his frail, unmoving body, he said, "He's not in the ward. He's in the walls. He's everywhere." Elena stumbled back, a choked cry escaping her lips, her hand flying to her mouth. The air in the room felt suddenly thick, suffocating, as if all oxygen had been sucked out. Lubansky's eyes rolled back into his head with a soft click, like a doll's eyes. His body, as if a puppet string had been cut, fell limp onto the bed, head hitting the pillow with a soft thud. The monitor started again. Beep, beep, beep. A normal rhythm. The green line danced, erratic but present. He was unconscious again, just like before, as if the last 30 seconds had been a hallucination, a waking nightmare, a trick of her exhausted mind. But the words, the impossible words, echoed in her head. She backed out of the room, her legs unsteady, trembling violently, and leaned against the hallway wall, pulse pounding in her ears, a frantic drumbeat that drowned out all other sound. Sweat prickled along her back, cold and clammy, chilling her to the bone. Every light felt too dim, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch with malevolent intent. Every shadow felt too deep, too alive, concealing unseen horrors. The hospital was no longer just an old building. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was playing with her, toying with her sanity. She needed answers, real answers, something that could explain the impossible, something that could pull her back from the precipice of madness. Back at the nurse's station, her hands fumbling with frantic urgency, She dug into the oldest patient records. Most were digitized, stored on the ancient computer, a relic that seemed to hum with its own hidden secrets, but a few thick, leather-bound folders were still kept for legal reasons, locked away in a dusty metal cabinet. She pulled them down one by one, the dry paper crumbling slightly under her touch, sending plumes of ancient dust into the air, until she found a thin, dust-covered file, its label faded but legible, almost glowing in the dim light. Blackwell, W. Room 609, long-term observation, status, unresolved. Her blood ran cold. Blackwell, the name from the cassette tape, the name that had been whispered in the dark. But room 609? There was no patient named Blackwell in any of the 6 rooms she checked in the East Wing. And room 609 didn't exist in this wing. The East Wing only went up to room 208. The number itself felt wrong, out of place. She flipped through the file, her fingers fumbling with the brittle, yellowed pages, each one a testament to forgotten horrors. There were brief, disjointed doctor's notes, erratic handwriting scrawled across the paper, some barely legible, others smeared with what looked like old water stains. Faded Polaroids, their colors washed out by time, showed a gaunt man, his eyes wide and vacant, strapped to a bed with thick, leather restraints. His face was a mask of silent suffering. No next of kin listed, no admission date, no discharge, just a blank space where those crucial details should have been, as if he had simply materialized here. The most recent entry was dated 1987, the same year as Dr. Kern's tape, and simply read, non-responsive. Still watching. Refuses food. Yet somehow alive. Subject continues to demonstrate an inexplicable vitality despite complete lack of sustenance. Observation ongoing. Prognosis unknown. The subject's condition defies all known medical understanding. His presence seems to induce a profound sense of unease in staff. Further study required, but caution advised. Then, below that in stark, bold red ink, scrawled with a desperate urgency, as if written by a trembling hand, do not move the bed. Under any circumstances, the connection must not be severed. His link to the structure is paramount. A yellowed post-it note, stuck haphazardly to the back of the file, curled at the edges, its adhesive long since dried. Its message, written in a shaky, almost frantic hand, made her stomach clench, a cold, sickening sensation. If he speaks to you, cover your ears. His voice is not his own. It is a conduit. It will infect you. Elena searched the facility map mounted on the wall near the emergency exit, its plastic coating cracked and yellowed, a faded blueprint of a hospital that no longer truly existed. The map, a relic from a time when the hospital was fully operational, showed 3 distinct wings, East, West, and Psych. The Psych wing, a sprawling, isolated section of the hospital, had been closed in 1992 and sealed off, along with Ward 6. Room 609 was listed in that area, deep within the abandoned Psych wing. Right next to the old therapy cells, the padded rooms, the places where minds were broken. A shiver ran down her spine. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture more terrifying than she could have imagined. A picture of madness and something far, far worse. She stared at the West Wing door again, the one she had tried to resecure, the one that now seemed to beckon her. The chains were still tangled, the chair still wedged, pathetic attempts at containment. This time, as if in response to her gaze, the dim, flickering light above it buzzed to life, casting a sickly yellow glow on the rusted sign, illuminating its ominous message. She took a breath, deep and shaky, the air feeling thin and cold in her lungs. She grabbed her flashlight, its beam a weak, trembling circle in the gloom, and stepped through the partially open door. The chains rattled, a faint, metallic whisper in the silence, like a warning. The air changed instantly. Thicker, colder, laden with the smell of dust, decay, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood or ozone. The hallway had no working lights, only the weak, dancing beam of her flashlight. Her shoes echoed too loudly, each step reverberating in the oppressive quiet, and the silence between steps was complete, absolute, as if the very air swallowed sound, leaving only the frantic pounding of her heart. She walked past empty rooms, their doors ajar like gaping mouths, revealing rusted equipment, beds with thick leather restraints dangling off the sides like limp, withered vines. The walls were covered in peeling green paint, revealing layers of grime and dark, unidentifiable stains beneath. It was a place that had been abandoned, but not forgotten. A place that held its secrets close, waiting for someone to find them. Then, at the very end of the hall, barely visible in the weak beam of her flashlight, she saw it. Room 609. The door was shut, a dark, impenetrable rectangle, darker than the surrounding shadows. A faded nameplate, barely legible, read, W. Blackwell. The letters seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. She stepped closer. Her flashlight, which had been fresh just hours ago, flickered violently, its beam pulsing as if the batteries were dying. But they were new, she was certain. The closer she got, the more the beam pulsed, like it was breathing, a living thing struggling for air, or perhaps being choked. It was as if the room itself was draining the light, consuming it. She pushed open the door. It groaned on rusted hinges, a sound that seemed to stretch on forever in the thick silence, a mournful cry. The room was dark except for a dim, sickly yellow lamp in the far corner, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters, like the ghosts of forgotten patients. The air was frigid, making her breath mist, each exhalation a cloud of vapor in the cold. And in the center of the room, strapped to a rusting hospital bed with thick, cracked leather restraints, was a man. He was pale, too pale, almost translucent, his skin stretched taut over sharp bones, like parchment. His eyes were open, glossy, unblinking, staring straight ahead, into the dark, into nothing. He looked right at her. His gaze was unnervingly direct, penetrating, as if he had been waiting for her, specifically, for a very long time. "Nurse Morgan," he said softly, his voice a dry, papery whisper, like sand shifting on a distant dune, or the rustle of ancient, brittle leaves. "You're late." She froze, every muscle in her body locked. The cold in the room seemed to deepen, seeping into her very bones, a chill that went beyond physical temperature. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, a threadbare sound in the vast silence, a desperate plea for a rational explanation. He smiled. It was a slow, deliberate movement, a grimace that stretched his thin lips, revealing gums that seemed to recede, exposing more of his teeth. His teeth were gray, stained with age and something else, something dark and ancient, like dried blood. "You were always going to come," he said, his voice gaining a faint, resonant quality, as if it echoed from deep within the walls themselves, from the very foundations of the hospital. "I've been dreaming of you, for a very long time. You have a certain resonance." Her flashlight, forgotten in her trembling hand, dropped to the floor with a dull thud, its beam dying instantly, plunging the room into deeper shadow, leaving her in the oppressive gloom. The monitor next to him, a dusty, archaic machine, beeped steadily, a rhythmic, reassuring sound that should have indicated a heartbeat, a sign of life. But it wasn't showing a heartbeat. It was showing hers. A frantic, spiking green line, mirroring the terror that now consumed her, a terrifying, undeniable link. Elena's hand hovered over the monitor screen, watching the green lines pulse in time with her own frantic heartbeat. The impossible reality of it slammed into her, a cold, hard truth that shattered her last vestiges of sanity. How? How could a machine connected to this decaying, ancient patient in a sealed-off ward be reading her vitals? It defied every law of medicine, every shred of logic she possessed. It was a direct, undeniable link, a violation of her very being. She turned back to the man in the bed, Mr. Blackwell, if that was even his real name. He hadn't moved, still bound at the wrists and ankles by thick, cracked leather restraints, his arms limp at his sides, his body a gaunt, unmoving presence. Yet his eyes, dead and empty, like polished stones, reflecting nothing, never left her, a silent, unnerving gaze that seemed to bore into her very soul, stripping away her defenses. "Why is this monitoring me?" she whispered, the question a desperate plea for understanding, for a return to some semblance of sanity, a desperate attempt to find a logical explanation. Blackwell's smile widened, a grotesque, knowing rictus that stretched his thin lips, revealing more of his gray teeth. "Because you're the one being observed now, Nurse Morgan. The subject of the experiment has changed. You are the new variable." His voice was still that dry, papery whisper, but now it held a chilling undertone of triumph. Something inside her broke for a second. The last vestiges of her composure shattered, splintering into 1,000 pieces. Fear, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, turned icy in her veins, flowing through her like poison. She backed away toward the door, her fingers fumbling blindly for the handle, desperate to escape, to put distance between herself and this impossible horror. The flashlight, lying on the floor where it had fallen, flickered violently, a dying gasp of light, then went out entirely, plunging the room into near absolute darkness, save for the dim, sickly glow from the corner lamp, which seemed to shrink away from the shadows. "He's watching through you now," Blackwell said, his voice low and warbled, like it was passing through a layer of thick, stagnant water, echoing from the very stones of the hospital, from the depths of the walls themselves. "You opened the door. You let him in. He's awake. And he's hungry." Elena didn't need to hear another word. The implication was clear, terrifying. She was a conduit, a new vessel for whatever malevolent entity resided in these walls. Her body, her mind, her very essence were now being claimed. She turned and ran, blindly, frantically, crashing into the doorframe in her haste, her legs pumping, fueled by pure, unadulterated terror, a desperate flight from an unseen predator. She didn't stop until she burst back into the east wing, the familiar yellowed tiles and buzzing fluorescence a jarring, almost comforting contrast to the suffocating darkness of Ward 6. Her chest heaved, lungs burning, a desperate struggle for breath, for air that didn't taste of decay and fear. She slammed the Ward 6 door shut with a resounding clang that echoed down the empty corridor, the sound a pathetic attempt to banish the horror she had just witnessed. Her hands, shaking violently, fumbled with the rusted chains, rewrapping them around the handle with desperate speed, her fingers scraping against the rough metal. Then, for good measure, she dragged a heavy, metal-framed chair from a nearby patient room and wedged it beneath the handle, a futile barricade against the impossible, a child's defense against a monster. The hallway was quiet again, almost too quiet. A silence that felt less like peace and more like a predator holding its breath, waiting, listening. The air itself seemed to hum with a low, malevolent energy. She ran straight for the storage room where they kept the paper records, a dimly lit space filled with the smell of old paper and dust, a place where forgotten histories lay dormant. The files dated back decades, dusty cardboard boxes stacked precariously to the ceiling, filled with the forgotten histories of St. Armand's, a silent archive of suffering. She pulled them down one by one, sending plumes of ancient dust into the air, until her fingers brushed against a thick, leather-bound binder, its title embossed in faded gold, almost invisible in the dim light. Dr. Lionel Kearns, Psychiatric Case Studies, 1983 to 1987. Her heart pounded with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. This was it, the missing piece, the key to understanding. Inside were loose-leaf pages, many handwritten in a precise, almost elegant script, some marked confidential in faded red ink. They detailed various patient assessments, experimental treatments, and disturbing observations, a chilling chronicle of a descent into madness. And there, tucked away in a folder specifically labeled Unresolved Cases, she found a cassette tape. It was old, its plastic casing scratched, but the label, written in neat cursive, was perfectly legible. Blackwell, W. Final interview. April 13th, 1987. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out, the plastic cold and brittle under her touch. This was it, the truth. She grabbed the staff lounge's ancient, clunky tape recorder, a relic from a forgotten era, its buttons worn smooth with use, and pressed play. The machine whirred to life, a faint, mechanical groan, and then the hiss of static filled the quiet room. Begin tape, heavy static, then a man's voice. Calm, clinical, almost unnervingly detached, as if reading from a script. Dr. Kearns, this is the final session with William Blackwell, subject designation patient 0. Date, April 13th, 1987. Time, 0300 hours. Observations. Subject remains physically alive despite complete refusal of nourishment or medical care for the past 41 days. His vitals are stable, if anomalous, defying all physiological norms. Cognitive function appears altered, but present. He maintains a consistent narrative regarding an entity within the hospital structure. This entity, he claims, sustains him. A long pause, filled only with the faint hiss of the tape, amplifying the tension. Then a dry, raspy voice, like stones grinding together, responds. It was the same voice she'd heard in room 609, now even more chilling on the recording. Blackwell, I don't need your food, doctor. Your meager sustenance is nothing. He feeds me. From the walls. From the fear. From the despair of the ones you leave here. He is the true lifeblood of this place. Dr. Kearns. And who is he, William? Can you elaborate on this entity you perceive? Provide more details regarding its nature and origin. Blackwell, he was born in the walls. Made from the minds of the broken ones you left here. The ones you experimented on. The ones you broke. The ones you discarded. Their pain, their madness, their fear, it coalesced. He doesn't forget. He listens through the vents. He sleeps behind the tiles. He breathes the fear of every patient, every nurse, every doctor who steps foot in this place. And now he wants someone new. A fresh mind. A new face, a willing vessel. Long silence, filled with the faint rustling of papers, as if Kearns was making frantic notes, trying to process the impossible, his clinical detachment beginning to crack. Then, Kearns' voice, slightly less composed, a tremor evident beneath his professional tone. Dr. Kearns, I recommend permanent sedation. This patient is clearly delusional and dangerous. His influence is pervasive. It's affecting the other subjects. The other patients are showing signs of sympathetic delusion, of shared nightmares. It's spreading. The integrity of the experiment is compromised. We must contain this. Blackwell, I'm not the one who started this, doctor. You are. With your curiosity, your ambition, your desire to understand what should remain unknown. You opened the door for him. You just didn't know it was a mouth. And now, you're trapped too. A sharp click. End tape. Followed by a lingering hiss of static, then silence. Elena sat frozen, the ancient tape recorder still whirring faintly, the echoes of Blackwell's voice chilling her to the bone. The words resonated with a terrifying clarity, explaining everything and nothing all at once. The he was real. It was born of the hospital, of the suffering within its walls, a monstrous byproduct of human cruelty and despair. And it wanted a new host, a new face, her face. She looked again at the file, her eyes scanning the handwritten notes, each word a fresh stab of dread. Scribbled in pencil at the bottom of the interview transcript were words Kearns must have written later, hastily, perhaps in a moment of profound terror, his scientific mind finally breaking under the weight of the impossible. Do not speak to Blackwell after dark. His voice doesn't come from his body. It comes from the walls, from the entity. It is a direct conduit. It will infect you. It will make you one of them. Below that, in fainter, almost desperate writing, a final, horrifying revelation that made her blood run cold. Ward 6 is a containment zone. Not for the patients. For the entity. The patients weren't sick. They were infected. They were hosts. And I opened the door. I unleashed it. My God, what have I done? Her mind reeled, a whirlwind of terrifying images and impossible truths. The intercom, calling her name. The missing lock on Ward 6. The impossible hallucinations. Mr. Lubansky's message, a warning from a comatose man. The footsteps, the voices in the ceiling. All of it was connected. All of it was the entity, the living, breathing horror that permeated the very structure of St. Armand's. The hospital wasn't just old. It was a living, malevolent organism, feeding on the fear and broken minds of those trapped within its decaying shell, and the growing, awful feeling that she wasn't supposed to be here. Not as a nurse, not as a helper, not as a healer. She was just another victim. Maybe no one was. Maybe this was its true purpose. A trap, a mouth, a noise crackled overhead. Not the familiar static of the intercom panel, but a deeper, more resonant sound, like something vast shifting within the building's unseen cavities. She looked up, her neck stiff with dread. The ceiling tiles directly above her shifted, slowly and deliberately, as if something vast and unseen was pressing against them from above, moving just out of sight, slithering through the ductwork. Dust rained down, fine and gray, settling on her hair and scrubs, a ghostly confetti. Then a voice, louder this time, came through the speaker, this time not distorted, not far. It was clear, resonant, and utterly devoid of warmth, a cold, flat pronouncement that seemed to vibrate directly in her skull. Code Gray. Code Gray. Elena Morgan. Room 609. Your admission is pending. The new subject is ready. No static. No hiss. Just the cold, flat pronouncement. A voice that knew her, claimed her. It was calling her by name again. Calling her back. To room 609. To Blackwell. To the entity. To her fate. She grabbed the folder, the tape, and her ID badge, clutching them to her chest like a shield, a pathetic attempt at protection, and rushed to the nurse's station, a desperate, irrational hope that the digital records might offer some solace, some escape, some proof that this wasn't real. The monitor, previously displaying only 6 patient names, now showed 7. The 7th name? Morgan, Elena, room 609, status, under observation, prognosis. Unresolved, her breath hitched. It was real. She was on the list. She was already a patient. The cold dread solidified into a block of ice in her chest. She touched the screen, her finger trembling against the cold glass, a desperate attempt to interact with the impossible. Her name blinked twice, then disappeared, replaced by a blank line. as if it had never been there, as if she was already gone, erased from the records, absorbed into the hospital's dark history. Elena didn't remember falling asleep. The last thing she recalled was the chilling revelation on the monitor, the cold dread of seeing her own name appear and then vanish from the patient log, a digital ghost. But exhaustion, a relentless, insidious force, had claimed her, pulling her down into a shallow, fitful slumber. She woke up with a jolt, her head against the cracked vinyl armrest of the break room chair, her neck stiff and aching. The flickering light above her hummed louder than usual, a frantic, buzzing drone that vibrated in her skull, a constant, irritating reminder of the hospital's dying power. Her limbs ached, stiff and heavy, as if she'd been running for days, not just hours. Her skin was clammy with sweat, cold despite the oppressive stillness of the room. For a brief, blissful second, she hoped it had all been a dream. A nightmare born of an unfamiliar place and an overactive imagination, a byproduct of too much coffee and too little sleep. Then she looked at the scarred formica table beside her. The folder, the cassette tape, the physical evidence of the impossible. Her own name, in her mind's eye, still listed under room 609, a phantom entry in a spectral ledger. No dream. This was terrifyingly, undeniably real. The cold, hard truth settled over her like a shroud. She stood, unsteady, her legs weak beneath her, threatening to give out. Her reflection in the grimy glass of the vending machine caught her off guard. Her eyes were bloodshot, sunken deep in their sockets, surrounded by dark circles. Her skin was pale and waxy, almost translucent, her hair matted with sweat and dust clinging to her forehead. She looked like someone who had been sick for days, ravaged by fever, not just hours into a new night shift. The transformation was unsettling, a physical manifestation of the mental toll this night was taking. The hallway was pitch dark, not just dim, but absolute, suffocating blackness that seemed to absorb all light, all hope. The emergency lights were out, their faint glow extinguished. The monitors at the nurse's station were off, their screens blank, dead eyes in the gloom. Even the relentless rain, which had been a constant, oppressive presence since she arrived, had stopped, leaving an unnatural, profound silence. Too quiet. The silence was profound, a heavy blanket that muffled all sound, even her own ragged breathing, which sounded impossibly loud in the void. It was the kind of quiet that pressed in on you, that felt like a living thing, listening. She walked to the nurse's station, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of pure terror. The entire hospital felt off, like the walls had moved a few inches overnight, shifting subtly, imperceptibly, distorting the very fabric of the building. Corridors stretched too far, their ends dissolving into deeper shadows, becoming endless tunnels. Doors were in the wrong places, familiar landmarks now alien, their numbers warped or missing. Room numbers repeated or vanished altogether, replaced by blank spaces. It was a labyrinth, and she was lost within it, a mouse in a deadly maze. She turned a corner, expecting the familiar path to the east wing, to the relative safety of the known, and found herself face to face with a hallway that shouldn't be there. It was wider, darker, and felt older, more ancient. The air here was thick with the smell of char and decay, a scent that made her stomach clench. At the very end of it, illuminated in a dim, pulsing red glow, like a dying ember or a distant, smoldering fire, stood the entrance to Ward 6, but not as she remembered it. The chains she had so desperately resecured were gone, vanished. The chair she had wedged was nowhere to be seen. Now the door was scorched black, its paint bubbled and peeling, revealing charred wood beneath. The metal frame was twisted, warped by immense heat. Burn marks streaked up the walls around it, clawing patterns of soot and destruction, like skeletal hands reaching for the ceiling. The air, already thick with dust and decay, now carried the unmistakable, acrid smell of old smoke and melting plastic, a scent that clung to the back of her throat, making her gag. The floor beneath her shoes felt soft, spongy, as though the linoleum tiles had bubbled and warped in intense heat and never hardened again, retaining a disturbing malleability, each step sinking slightly into the yielding surface. The fire, the one Daryl said happened decades ago, the one that officially sealed off this wing, the one that was supposed to be a memory, but it wasn't decades ago now. It was happening again, or perhaps it was always happening. A perpetual event, a moment frozen in time, replaying itself over and over within these walls. She took a step toward the door, compelled by an invisible force, a morbid fascination she couldn't resist, even as every instinct screamed at her to flee. She felt the temperature rise instantly, a sudden, oppressive heat that prickled her skin, making her pores open and sweat trickle down her back. Her ID badge, still clipped to her scrubs, began to melt halfway off the clip, the plastic warping and dripping onto her uniform, a tangible sign of the impossible heat. Her skin stung, a sharp, burning sensation, but the heat didn't consume her. It was a phantom fire, a memory made real, designed to guide her, to draw her in, to claim her. Still, she walked, one foot in front of the other, drawn by the terrifying spectacle like a moth to a deadly flame. The hallway behind her sealed shut with a groan, a deep, grinding sound of stone against stone, of metal twisting. The darkness swallowed the space where she had just been, leaving no path for retreat, no way back to the East Wing. She was being guided, forced, drawn deeper into the hospital's living nightmare, into the heart of its horror. Inside Ward 6, everything burned in slow motion. The air shimmered with heat, distorting the light, but the flames themselves were silent, licking the walls but making no sound, consuming nothing. The fire crawled over chairs, beds, gurneys, yet never truly consumed them, just wrapped around them like luminous, orange vines, their light casting long, dancing shadows that writhed on the walls, grotesque parodies of human forms. It was a perpetual inferno, a tableau of destruction frozen in time, a hellish diorama. And through the fire were voices, whispers, faint and distorted, like distant echoes of screams, of pleas, of mad laughter, of desperate prayers. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, weaving through the silent flames, a chorus of the damned, of the trapped. Elena stepped through a ruined doorway marked Therapy Room C, its frame charred and twisted, shielding her face from the heat that didn't quite burn, a heat that was more psychological than physical, a heat that seared her soul. Inside, she found scorched medical files scattered across the floor, their pages brittle and blackened, their contents lost to the flames. Leather restraints, melted and fused to the frames of beds, dangled like macabre decorations, symbols of past suffering. And on the far wall, nailed haphazardly into the charred plaster, were dozens of name tags, old and tarnished, each one a testament to a forgotten patient, a lost soul. All burned black, except one. It hung slightly lower than the others, pristine white against the soot-stained wall, utterly untouched by the inferno. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, the metal tag cold, untouched by fire, utterly out of place, a chilling anomaly. Morgan, Elena, nurse in training, date, TBD. The letters were crisp, clear. It wasn't a historical artifact. It was a prophecy. She wasn't just here. She had always been meant to be here, a part of the hospital's dark, cyclical history. Another piece of the puzzle, Another victim in the making. She turned, her breath catching in her throat, and saw him. Standing in the far corner, partially obscured by the silent, dancing flames, was Dr. Kearns. He looked exactly like his photo from the file. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, reflecting the phantom firelight, making his eyes seem to glow. Gray-streaked hair, neatly combed despite the chaos, a chillingly pristine detail. A lab coat, once white, now stained with soot and what looked like dried, dark blood, a testament to his own suffering. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. His eyes, though, were alive, filled with a chilling, knowing despair, a profound sadness that seemed to stretch back through decades. "You were supposed to take my place," he said, his voice hollow, echoing as if from a vast, empty chamber, devoid of any human warmth. It was the same clinical tone from the tape, but now infused with a profound weariness, a resignation to his fate. "You were supposed to surrender, to accept your purpose, but you fought it. You were stubborn, resilient. What are you talking about?" Elena whispered, her voice barely a croak, lost in the silent roar of the flames, a desperate plea for understanding. "You weren't the first, just the most stubborn." He stepped closer, his movements fluid, unnatural, as if he floated, his feet barely touching the charred floor. His shadow stretched far too long behind him, twisting and elongating, reaching out like grasping fingers, encompassing the entire room. They always come, the ones who run from something, from their own failures, their own pain, from the guilt that gnaws at them. Hospitals attract them, wounded caretakers, broken helpers, those who seek to fix others to avoid fixing themselves. The ward offers them meaning, a purpose, a way to atone, but it always takes more. It takes everything. It takes them. She shook her head, backing away, her heels scraping against the charred floor, a desperate attempt to create distance. "No, I don't understand. What is this place? What is happening?" "This place is hungry," Kearns replied, his gaze fixed on her, unwavering. "And you left a mark on him. A strong imprint. A resonance. Now he wants your face, your mind, your essence. He wants to wear you." Suddenly the walls around them began to pulse, a deep, resonant thudding, like a monstrous heartbeat, reverberating through the very ground. The phantom flames rose higher, licking at the ceiling, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with agony. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing in on Elena, suffocating her, but still, the fire didn't burn. It was a visual, a sensation, a psychological assault, designed to break her. Then from behind Kearns, a shape emerged. Tall, faceless, drenched in ash, as if it had just risen from the heart of the inferno itself. Its form was indistinct, wavering, like smoke given solid form, constantly shifting, impossible to truly define. Its hands, impossibly long and skeletal, dragged long cords of hospital tubing, which snaked and writhed behind it like living tendrils, like a parasitic organism. The thing from the walls. The he from Blackwell's tape. The true master of St. Armand's. It didn't walk. It flowed forward, a silent, inexorable tide of malevolence, its presence crushing the air from the room. And as it passed Kearns, the doctor's form shimmered, wavered, and then dissolved into a fine mist of ash, scattering into the silent flames, becoming one with the perpetual fire. He was gone, absorbed, a final sacrifice, another soul claimed. Elena ran. She sprinted down a twisting corridor that shouldn't exist, a labyrinthine passage that seemed to reconfigure itself with every step, the walls shifting, the floor tilting, past screaming doors that groaned and slammed shut behind her, past flickering lights that pulsed like dying hearts. The very air seemed to push against her, hindering her escape, dragging at her limbs. She ran, driven by pure, primal terror, until she burst into room 609, the one place she knew she was meant to be. It was empty. The dim lamp in the corner still glowed, casting its sickly yellow light. The restraints still dangled from the bed. But Mr. Blackwell was gone, vanished, absorbed, perhaps, into the walls himself. Except for the bed. And on the bed was a single white gown, folded neatly. The same kind the patients wore. The same kind that had Elena's name stitched on it, waiting for her. The intercom crackled above her again, a sharp, decisive sound that resonated in her very bones. Room 609. Patient Morgan, condition, admitted. Welcome home. Your purpose awaits. Elena stood in room 609, the words condition, admitted echoing in the suffocating silence, a final, damning pronouncement. Her gaze was fixed on the folded gown on the bed, its stark, white fabric a beacon of her inescapable fate. Her own name, she knew, was stitched across the chest, a brand of ownership, a mark of her new identity. No more clipboard entries, no more shift logs, just a patient number, a designation, a statistic in a monstrous ledger. The hospital had decided. She wasn't staff anymore. She was a possession, a new addition to its collection. The single, dim lamp in the corner buzzed louder with each ragged breath she took, its light seeming to shrink, to draw inwards, tightening the already oppressive space. The gown looked impossibly clean, freshly pressed, untouched by the soot and chaos that permeated the rest of Ward 6, a cruel mockery of normalcy, a pristine shroud. And still, the intercom, a voice of relentless, inhuman authority, repeated in a flat monotone, echoing from the walls themselves. Room 609. Patient Morgan. Status, under observation. Please prepare for final assessment. Compliance is required. She tried to leave. Her hand reached for the door, but there was no handle on the inside. Only a smooth, cold surface, unyielding and impenetrable. A one-way room. A cell. She was trapped, utterly and completely. The walls seemed to inhale, a slow, deliberate contraction that made the air grow heavy, thick, pressing in on her from all sides. The quiet pressure closing in around her was palpable, pressing on her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs, making it difficult to breathe. Her knees buckled and she fell onto the edge of the mattress, the thin sheets ice cold beneath her trembling fingers, a chill that seeped into her very bones. The room was shrinking, just a little, the walls subtly drawing closer, the ceiling lowering, making the space feel like a coffin, a tomb. Suddenly, the air vent directly above her rattled violently, a metallic clatter that sliced through the silence, making her jump. A hand dropped out, pale, too long, fingers stretched thin and skeletal, ending in sharp, black nails. It was dripping something black and viscous onto the floor below, a thick, oily substance that spread slowly, silently. It gripped the edge of the vent with unnatural strength, its nails digging into the metal, and hung there for a moment, twitching, flexing. Then another hand, identical in its pallor and grotesque length, emerged, gripping the vent. Then the face, faceless, not skin, but hospital gauze, wrapped tightly and meticulously around where a head should be, stained in the center where a mouth might be, a dark, wet patch that seemed to pulse faintly, like a wound. The tubing, thick and dark, twisted from its arms like umbilical cords, snaking and writhing, trailing off into the dark recesses of the ductwork, connecting it to the very structure of the hospital. It pulled itself halfway out of the vent, soundlessly, with an eerie, spider-like grace, its segmented body unfolding, dripping the black substance onto the floor, its movements fluid and disturbing. Elena screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure terror, but there was no sound. Not from her, not from the room. The world had muted. Her scream was trapped inside her own head, a silent, agonizing echo, a private torment. The creature dropped from the ceiling with a soft, wet thud, the sound barely audible, and stepped forward, its movements fluid, unnatural, like water flowing uphill, or smoke given malevolent form. And in the profound, suffocating silence, the intercom whispered, its voice now directly in her mind, bypassing her ears entirely, a cold, insidious thought. It's time for your final check-in, Nurse Morgan. The collection is complete. You are home now. She backed into the far corner, pressing herself against the cold, unyielding wall, desperate to escape, to find a space where it couldn't reach her. Her fists clenched, nails digging into her palms, a futile attempt to ground herself in a reality that was rapidly dissolving, shattering around her. Her breath hitched, ragged and shallow, each gasp a struggle against the crushing pressure. But the thing didn't attack. It stood inches away, its faceless head tilted slightly, as if observing her with an unseen gaze, studying her, dissecting her, watching her, breathing. A faint, rhythmic rasping sound, like dry leaves skittering across a vast, empty space, or something dragging itself across rough stone. The black liquid continued to drip from its fingers, forming small, glistening puddles on the floor, expanding slowly, like dark, spreading stains. It raised one hand, impossibly long and pale, and gently pressed its finger to her forehead. The touch was cold, like ice, yet it burned, a searing pain that shot through her skull. Suddenly, she saw the fire again. Not a memory, not a hallucination. A loop, a burning loop, playing over and over, eternally. A moment frozen in time, replaying itself within the hospital's consciousness. The same hallway, scorched and crumbling, choked with smoke. The same screams, silent yet deafening in her mind, a chorus of agony. Nurses running, their faces contorted in terror, their scrubs singed. Patients clawing at the walls, their hands leaving bloody streaks on the peeling paint, desperate to escape. And at the center of it all, Blackwell, unmoving, unblinking, strapped to his bed, his eyes wide and vacant, watching the inferno, an eternal observer, a silent witness to the endless torment. He was part of the loop, part of the fire. He had never caused the fire. He had never escaped it either. He had become part of it, a permanent fixture in the hospital's endless nightmare, a silent, suffering sentinel. And now, so would she. She saw herself from above, a detached, horrifying perspective, as if her soul had already left her body. She was laying on the bed in room 609, the white gown pulled over her frail body, tubes inserted into her arms, connecting her to the ancient, humming machines. Her eyes, wide and staring blankly at the ceiling, reflected the dim, flickering light, seeing nothing, perceiving everything. A flat line beeped in the background, a steady, mournful tone, signifying the end of her physical life. But the monitors still pulsed, still measured. She wasn't dying. She was being recorded, being collected. Her mind, her fear, her very essence, fed into the walls, into the entity. Another loop, another patient, another host. Her consciousness, trapped within the hospital's endless, hungry cycle. Then darkness, absolute, consuming darkness. A void that swallowed everything, even the last flicker of her awareness. Elena's final voice memo, timestamp, unknown. Sound of heavy static, then a voice, strained, hoarse, barely a whisper, but unmistakably Elena's. Each word is a struggle, imbued with a desperate urgency. If you're hearing this, you shouldn't be here. You have to leave. Now. Don't even think about coming closer. This place isn't a hospital. Not anymore. It's a mouth. A trap. a living, breathing predator. It lures you in with the promise of purpose, of escape, of healing, but it only consumes. It takes everything. Ward 6 doesn't treat people. It collects them. It feeds on them. It makes them part of its endless cycle, its eternal nightmare. The patients, the doctors, the nurses, were all just components. Parts of the machine. Fuel for its hunger. You think you're helping. You think you're healing. You think you're saving someone from this place. You think you're strong enough to resist. But you're just the next patient, the next host, the next meal, the next voice in the walls. Please, don't open the door. Don't come here. Don't let it find you. Don't let it whisper your name. The hospital is still alive, and it's always hungry, always waiting. A soft click. End of message. Followed by a long, drawn-out hiss of static, then a faint, rhythmic scruff, thump, scruff, thump, that fades into silence. Daryl returned at 6:01 a.m., his shift starting just as the first gray light of dawn began to break through the perpetual cloud cover. He carried his battered umbrella in one hand, a steaming coffee cup in the other, its warmth a small comfort against the morning chill. The scent of stale nicotine and lukewarm coffee clung to him. The rain had started again, heavy, relentless, drumming against the roof of St. Armand's, a steady, monotonous rhythm that seemed to underscore the hospital's isolation, its endless, weeping existence. He walked to the nurse's station, his boots echoing in the quiet, expecting Elena to be half asleep in the break room, slumped over a cold cup of coffee, just like every other new night nurse who thought they could handle St. Armand's. They always started out bright-eyed, and then the hospital wore them down or scared them off. But it was empty. Her duffel bag was still there, slumped against the cracked vinyl chair, a silent testament to her presence, a forgotten piece of a life that had been. Her ID badge, a mangled piece of plastic, was melted, fused to the edge of the counter, a disturbing, inexplicable detail that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The monitors were off, their screens blank and lifeless. The file room door was ajar, a mess of scattered papers spilling out onto the floor, as if a frantic search had taken place, or a struggle. Daryl frowned, a flicker of unease stirring in his tired eyes. This wasn't like the new girl. She seemed too by the book to leave such a mess. Too professional. He stepped closer to the nurse's station, a prickle of unease crawling up his neck, a familiar sensation in this place. And on the intercom panel, that ancient, dust-covered monstrosity that had been long dead for decades, a relic of a bygone era, a single, small green light blinked steadily. A rhythmic, hypnotic pulse of emerald in the gloom, a beacon in the darkness. Daryl leaned closer, his brow furrowed, a cold knot forming in his stomach, a premonition of dread. He reached out a hesitant finger, almost touching the light, drawn by its impossible glow. The speaker hissed, a sound like air escaping from a deep, unseen cavity, or a breath drawn from the very walls. And then, in a voice not quite human, a voice that was flat and resonant, like a recording played from deep within the walls themselves, a voice he knew he had heard before, but never so clearly. Code Gray. One patient remains unaccounted for. Searching initiated. The cycle continues. The green light continued to blink. The rain outside intensified, a ceaseless drumming. Daryl stood frozen, the coffee growing cold in his hand, as the hospital's ancient, hungry silence settled once more, waiting for its next meal. He looked at the west wing door, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor running through the chains. He felt a pull, a whisper in the back of his mind. He just needed to check. Just one look. You've just heard. The last patient of Ward 6. But the hospital isn't empty. Not really. Some doors, once opened, never close again. If this story stayed with you, leave a like, share it with someone who loves a chilling tale, and subscribe for more stories that haunt your sleep. _Sleep well if you can.